On Tuesday, my source came to me and said, Grace, you see that story you read? There's something even more deeper happening with Helen and a guy called Quincy. I'm like, who's Quincy?
Quincy Timberlake is a man of great mystery. His name alone is very suspicious because it seems like a combination of the names of famous music producer Quincy Jones and famous artist Justin Timberlake. Not much is really known about this man, where he grew up, the kind of schools he attended, or his childhood. His Wikipedia page says he was born on April 22nd, 1980, and describes him as a Kenyan political activist, occultist, and former presidential candidate. According to Grace, the man's identity was closely guarded, and even those who knew him were unwilling to talk about him.
Everyone feared Quincy. If you notice, is there anyone who talks about Quincy in any story you've done, your research on? No one. It's only the journalists who write, and if they write, they say a source. Mm-hmm. They don't. I wouldn't say Grace Karongo said Quincy did. Mm-mm. So Quincy was feared for some reason. I think he probably threatened people. People just feared him.
In fact, during the Finger of God saga, one of the reasons why he was arrested was because his nationality was in question. But he was later cleared by the immigration department as a Kenyan citizen. I don't blame the authorities for questioning his nationality because if you look up information on him, none of it is consistent. In an interview with Nation Media back in 2010, Quincy told the press that his real name was Quincy Zuma Wambiti and that he hailed from a village called Marera in the Rongo area of Migori County. I came across this Nation article that helped piece together bits and pieces from his past. The article reveals that in the 90s to 2000s, Quincy was trying to make it as an entertainer and that he was part of the local Lingala scene. He has been a regular feature either as an entertainer or patron at most entertainment spots that play Congolese music to the point where people thought he was Congolese. Veteran dancer and singer Kanda King actually confirmed having Quincy as a member of his African Rhythms band between 2003 and 2004, where he played the keyboard. If you're too young to know who Kanda King is, he was a really famous dancer back in the day, so you might want to ask your parents about him. Not only was Quincy a member of Kanda King's band, but he was also being accommodated by the dancer at his residence in Donholm. This was after he pretended to be a South African national interested in collaborating with the late rapper K-Rapt. At this time, he was even going by a stage name known as Fizzle Dog. The Nation reports that after some time, Quincy's dealings seemed dodgy and Ogopa DJs, the label K-Rapt was signed to at the time, cut all ties with him and warned K-Rapt about him. Sometime later, K-Rapt died in what was reported to be a carjacking and Fizzle Dog vanished. Now, I'm not saying anything, but that's just something to think about. Fast forward to almost 10 years later, and Quincy resurfaces as an upcoming politician and one of the leading pastors at the Finger of God Church.
My source came to me and said, Grace, you see that story you read? There's something even more deeper happening with Helen and a guy called Quincy. I'm like, who's Quincy? It's like, Quincy is a con man. Don't sue me. That's what they say. He's really disrupted a church. I'm like, which church? Helen's church. Helen has a church called Finger of God.
Several people claim that Quincy's sudden involvement with the Finger of God is what led to its downfall. From former members to Wilson and even later on, Helen, all fingers point to Quincy for ruining the church. But did Quincy joining the group disrupt it, or did it merely expose the cracks already present? So you may be wondering, what cracks am I talking about? Around the same time this saga was unfolding, Pulse magazine, a publication by the Standard newspaper, reported that a week after Wilson announced his upcoming wedding with Esther, one of the ladies living in Helen's house ran away. The lady later narrated to one of the pastors how Helen was allegedly involving them in sexual acts. The pastor informed Esther's fiancé about this, and Wilson immediately phoned Esther and asked her to leave, but she didn't. What followed instead was a string of text messages from Helen directed to Wilson, accusing him of killing Helen's son, plotting to sacrifice Esther through a road accident, and having an estranged family in South B Estate. Helen also expelled Wilson from the church, along with the pastor from before, and another member known as Mark Bichachi. Mark Bichachi is currently a well-known political analyst who acted as sort of a whistleblower at the time the Finger of God saga blew up. We'll get to him later. Besides being expelled from the church, Wilson's troubles only got worse as he soon received a text from Esther, breaking the engagement. According to Esther, this decision was under the guidance of Helen, her spiritual father at the time. Anyway, back to Quincy. So, how did he join the Finger of God church? According to Helen, Quincy is his childhood friend as they schooled together in primary school. The jazz musician still maintains that to this day. The word at the time, however, was that Helen's childhood friend had just returned from the UK and was back to make music with Helen and help him run the church. Little did Helen know that Quincy would run his church to the ground.
That church, I'll say, it has a lot of celebs and that kind of. She had that kind of excitement about the membership of the people who were meeting there. Her overall view was that the people who have been meeting there, doing church-like activities, have been involved. That church is not very church-like.
It's secular.
It's the way they dress, the kind of people that you see on TV, celebrity like you see there. You can have a church in your neighborhood and they play the keyboard, they beat the drum and they sing, and you hear them singing songs that you might know. So they were not that kind of church for her, and that was a bit of a concern for her, and even the way they dress and the kind of people who go there. So it seemed to her like a gathering of celebrities or well-known young people, and they're not involved in traditional Christian behavior.
Some of them were my sources, so I don't want to put them on blast.
My interviewees were reluctant to name the celebrities that used to attend the church, and I understand that, but because this is the Raw Pod and we like to keep it real and raw, I'll mention a few that I came across. Back in 2010, the Weekly Citizen paper reported that the church had attracted a lot of celebrity members, most of whom were media personalities. The article listed celebrities such as Ann Kiguta, Lilian Muli, Citizen TV's Linus Kaikai, and even Maina Kageni as some of the church's alleged celebrity attendees. The article goes on to claim that veteran rapper Prezzo is one of the celebrities who was approached to join the church, but he denied because at the time he was a Muslim. Another article by Pulse magazine alleges that members of the former girl group known as Tattoo were also part of the celebrities that attended the Finger of God church. If you're too young to know what group I'm talking about, again, ask your parents or your older siblings. This group was Kenya's very own Destiny's Child. You just had to be there, honestly. If you're too old, maybe this might jog your memory. But local celebrities weren't the only ones associated with the Finger of God Church. Remember the exclusive emails that Grace talked about in part 1? This is where they come in.
I was given like an envelope full of emails. So I was like, okay, I'll deal with these emails after I've done my stories for the next day. So when I started going through the emails, it's weird. Like to date, I still think it's very weird because you'd get emails to Esther Runga. They aren't really emails, they're like chats.
Yeah.
I don't know if Gmail still has those chats where you can chat with someone like the way you chat on WhatsApp. They used to have those. I don't know if Gmail still has that. So these chats were between Esther and an online persona called, what's his name? This
Is it Benny Hinn?
Benny Hinn, yes. Between,
I was actually about to ask you about
yes,
that.
between Esther and Benny Hinn.
Yes, you heard that right. Famous televangelist Benny Hinn was tied to the church and was even acting as a spiritual guide to Esther and Helen. The televangelist would give daily instructions to the two. One of those instructions was that Helen breaks up Esther and Wilson's engagement in favor of, you guessed it, Quincy. According to Grace, Benny Hinn would also schedule prophecy hours with them.
So the emails you'll get, Benny Hinn has told Esther, "Hi, my daughter, please make sure you're online at around 8 tonight. I'd like to prophesy stuff about your life." So emails have been sent to Esther to be prophesied to by Benny Hinn at 8 p.m. So she, of course, now everyone in the house knows, like, Benny Hinn, spiritual father. It's not him, by the way.
Yeah,
it wasn't him. So everyone knows. So Esther is in a room. Of course, she's dressed the way she's dressed. And Quincy is not in that room, and everyone else is not in that room. So when Esther is chatting with the spiritual father, this guy is prophesying of her life. He's saying, "My daughter, I can see you even wearing a gray jacket. You're looking very, I can see you from way over here where chicken and gear box." Then he's like, "Oh, by the way, you need to get married to Quincy. He's the man for you. He loves you. He's the only one God has ordained for you. Leave this other guy alone," because I don't want to mention him. He was also a victim of this. "Leave this other guy alone. He's the one who killed this one's kid. They're the ones spoiling the church. They're bringing demons into..." All that is in emails.
The US-based pastor was even urging Helen to include Quincy in the church committee and instructed him to allow Quincy to preach before him during service. This is probably how he became one of the senior leaders in the church. Pastor Hinn also began prophesying to Helen and Esther about their future political careers. In one of the emails, the televangelist cautions Helen about the controversy surrounding his entry into politics. The email reads, "I can see in 2011 to 2012 you becoming nominated as an MP out of your music tour globally, as there's a neighboring minister who already hates you for that announcement from the Prime Minister Raila camp." Another email from the famous pastor reads, "I see Esther becoming a prominent personality in government. This is what the parents hate to learn, since they think that Esther will never value them seriously anymore."
I kind of get why they'd believe him, because imagine if I'm chatting with you and you know me as a big spiritual leader and I know things about you. I know that your mother did this or your father did that, and it's not like we talk, we are not friends. You'd be like, "How does this person know?" So this Benny Hinn character used to tell Esther things about her sister, her cousin, her mother, her father, and stuff like that. And I think that's how she got hooked. And that's how the whole thing happened.
Benny Hinn wasn't the only famous person associated with Finger of God. An article by Pulse magazine reveals that Helen also received emails from the legendary artist Whitney Houston. Yes, the Whitney Houston. The "I Will Always Love You" Whitney Houston. That one. In one of them, the singer was begging Helen to release Quincy back to her as she was powerless without him. This is how the email read. "I know you're serving some powerful thing, and I do serve mine too, which I think is also all-powerful. Quincy was almost joining the core of the Brotherhood by January 25th, and you distorted everything. Without him, I got no power. Do me a favor. I need him back, and you get $10,000. In case you're wondering what the Brotherhood is, let me explain. In an interview with the Standard newspaper, Quincy confessed that he was once a member of the Freemasonry, which is the largest secret society in the world. In the interview, Quincy claims that he joined the society to escape poverty while he was studying in the US. Quincy further explains that after joining the group, he instantly became rich and gained access to A-list celebrities, and that's how he met Beyonce, Jay-Z, Whitney Houston, and the like. Yeah, I find this to be BS because one thing I know about celebrities and public figures in general is that all their moves are strategic. From their friendships to even the people they marry, every move has intention behind it, and they're not just seen with anyone for the sake of it. There's always some form of intention behind every person they associate with. So I call BS on this. But anyway, back to the story. Quincy claimed he fled Washington and returned to Kenya in 2009 after senior members of the secret society threatened to sacrifice him. Anyway, back to the emails. Benny Hinn denied ever communicating with Helen and Esther. Not only that, the US pastor didn't even know the church existed. This revelation came after the Star newspaper contacted the Benny Hinn ministries to ask about the emails. So, if the actual Benny Hinn wasn't the one on email, then who was? According to Grace, one of her sources, who was a former member of the church, explained to her where they got the emails from.
So I'm reading this, I call my source, I'm like, the fuck? What is this? He's like, yeah, so those emails, we got them off whose computer? Quincy's computer. And when we confronted Helen, Quincy and Esther about these emails, we were excommunicated, like we are evil, we are trying to bring down the church. And these other people also went and told the people who are going to that church, guys, this thing, it's not for real. Be careful. So of course, a lot of people left the church.
And one of those people is popular political analyst Mark Bichachi, who I mentioned earlier as having been sort of a whistleblower during this entire situation. In an interview with Citizen TV, Bichachi details the happenings within the church. According to him, the church ran through a committee of 23 members, and he was third in command after Mr. Alan Odada, who by the way was the pastor that the lady who fled from Helen's house talked to. The two would set the stage before Helen began to preach. During the interview, the question of congregants living in Helen's home came up. This is what he had to say.
The explanation were given by Helen, which I tend to believe, was the people needed help. They needed counseling, they needed help. Esther is a relative of Helen's. So to us, that was nothing suspicious because we were told he's her uncle, actually.
Esther and Helen are related?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what we were told.
That's what you were told?
Yes.
And so what was going on? Why did they have to stay there for counseling? Was it a kind of rehab?
Yes, that is what Helen made it to be, that it was a place where people would come for help, which is okay, provided nothing sinful, nothing wrong is going on. And I think that's what also needs to be made very clear. It's only wrong if members who used to live in that house can step up and say that Helen did anything wrong.
Mr. Bichachi also claims that it was not only exposing Quincy's emails that led them to be excommunicated, but also challenging Quincy's teachings, which he says were not biblical.
The first thing we realized is Quincy had come into the church with a lot of lies, with a lot of doctrines that were not biblical, speaking about issues with sexuality, issues with making a lot of money through certain deals that were not exactly clear, which we questioned, and after we questioned this particular said deals, we were consequently excommunicated from the church.
Give us an example of a deal.
For example, saying that Helen has been nominated for the Oscars, yet he's a musician.
Really?
Yes. It's on tape, actually, that he was nominated for the Oscars, while only musicians nominated for Grammys. So when you question such things, among other things, is when we got kicked out. What Mark Bichachi said also ties into what his fellow pastor, Alan Odada, claimed in a message sent to an online forum back in early 2010. In the message, the pastor was sharing his discomfort surrounding Quincy's presence in the church. I'll be reading a few paragraphs from the message. Greetings, everyone. My names are Apostle Alan Odada. Until yesterday, I was the apostle of Finger of God Ministries International. Of late, many strange things have been happening in the ministry that I don't agree with. We approached Apostle Joseph Hellon, I, Apostle Kevin, Apostle Wilson, and Apostle Mark to confront the strange happenings, upon which we were called fools and dismissed. So in case you're wondering who those are, Kevin is the late Kevin Ombajo, who was an events organizer and the owner of True Black Entertainment, an event organizing company. Wilson is Esther's former fiancé, and Mark is Mark Bichachi. So, the message continues. These things continued even after the confrontation, and we were told to blindly just believe. For those of you who have been coming to church of late, you know that the message that has been preached, first of all, are substantiated falsehoods which I have refused to accept. Due to that, I have been excommunicated from the church and released from all my duties. I have been falsely accused to be a Freemason, basically a devil worshipper, and worse still, a sex pest. I find these allegations immature and lacking in discernment and extreme garbage. Apparently, this discernment is from a demon masquerading as Benny Hinn, which Apostle Joseph Hellon has unquestionably believed and followed to the letter. We have been told to just believe that Quincy is purported to be like Christ and the anchor to Hellon's future. Some of the propagated lies include: he has been to all countries except 3, he has dated Eva Mendes, Eve the rapper, and Whitney Houston, can walk in and out of Buckingham Palace and access to multiple visas, whereas he does not have a valid identity or passport, nor work permit to serve as a minister at Finger of God Church. The message then ends with Mr. Odada declaring that he would no longer be a member of the church. Despite a section of the church's members being gone, this did not stop Quincy's operations within Finger of God. In fact, he was just getting started. In part 1, I mentioned that Hellon and Esther announced their interest in politics ahead of the 2012-2013 elections. Hellon was to run for president with Esther as his running mate. This was a perfect setup for Quincy, who also had political ambitions of his own. This is where the infamous Placenta Party of Kenya comes into play.
Quincy came up with the idea of Placenta Party. And wanted to be the chairman of the party. He found Esther and I already working on our political ambitions. I wanted to be president and Esther wanted to be my running mate.
The party's goal was, in their own words, to, and I quote, thrash the elite stranglehold on liberty, uniting Kenya's culturally diverse patriots who embrace traditional family values and restoring freedom of worship and expression. End of quote. To put it simply, they believed that certain powers were controlling all the country's affairs and that it was their duty to change that. Esther Arunga backed this belief in an interview with Jeff Koinange back when he hosted the show Capital Talk on K24. In the interview, Esther went on an expose rant about how the Freemason secret society controls all of Kenya's political affairs and outcomes. Esther also claimed that the secret society was out to attack their party in an attempt to silence their political ambitions.
Freemasonry, as I told you, you rise up according to how many people you kill. Notice politics and politicians, many of whom are Freemasons, towards election time, and this is one of the reasons they're supposed to die, the higher the person you kill, the more power you get. So if they killed me, they would have been president, these particular individuals. They were getting groomed to be president for 2012.
I highly recommend you watch that interview on YouTube. The Placenta Party trio clearly had big plans for themselves and Kenyans. So much so that Quincy was planning to fly in the late talk show host, Larry King, for an interview with Helen for him to reveal the party's plans to Kenya and the world.
There's a part in the emails where he's telling Helen, there's also chats with Helen, he's telling Helen, we're going to launch a presidential campaign and we'll bring CNN's top journalist, Larry King. I don't know if you remember Larry King, he died. Yeah. So then everyone had written about it. Larry King is coming to Kenya to do all these things.
But little did the three know that not everyone favored their political ambitions. In the first part of this series, I mentioned that Esther Arunga's parents were part of the elite members of Kenyan society and that the father in particular had close ties with ODM. Well, in a few you'll realize why that info is important. So as I was going down the rabbit hole of this story, I came across this article by a publication known as the Kenyan Daily Post, detailing very disturbing encounters that Esther Arunga underwent after the Runda police raid and their subsequent arrest. The article drew this info from an investigative report by an Australian company known as Procter & Associates, Solicitors and Barristers Australia. So, why an Australian company? By the time these investigations were being conducted, Esther Arunga and Quincy had sought asylum in the country and were Australian residents, so they were persons of interest to the country. But we'll get more on their life in Australia in part 3. Be sure to stay tuned. The report reveals very shocking material, and due to the nature of the content, I won't go into detail about what happened, so I'll just try to summarize. According to the report, Esther was allegedly sexually assaulted by 2 police officers on the day of the raid. Thereafter, she and Quincy were detained. She was held at Muthaiga police station, while Quincy was held at Pangani police station and Helen at Gigiri police station. Esther and Quincy were later transferred to the DCI headquarters along Kiambu Road, where they were interrogated, and Quincy was forced to take an oath to end his relationship with Esther. Esther was then released to a certain Dr. Frank Jenga's custody on the basis of a psychiatric evaluation and sedated with her father's consent. She was later transferred to Chiromo Medical Center, where she was held under tight security. It was here that the unthinkable happened. According to the report, it was discovered that Esther was pregnant after a physical examination was conducted on her. Dr. Njenga was then given orders to forcefully terminate the pregnancy. So you may be wondering, what was the reason for all this drama? In an interview with Pulse magazine, Esther revealed that her family, together with senior government officials, had conspired to marry her off to a very senior cabinet minister. According to Weekly Citizen, the cabinet minister, who had developed an interest in the former TV anchor, wasn't too happy that she had turned down his advances. This prompted the immigration troubles that Quincy faced when the government started questioning his nationality and citizenship. Who's the CS, you ask? Well, I'll give you a few hints. The CS in question was a former head of the immigration ministry and a member of the ODM party. He was also a former senator. It's now up to you to connect the dots. I'm not giving you everything. The other reason is that Quincy was seen as a political threat to the ODM camp because he wanted to vie for the Lang'ata constituency seat in the 2013 elections. Lang'ata has been ODM's tough for the longest time, and Quincy's interest in the seat meant that he was going to be facing Raila Odinga, who was then the Prime Minister, as an opponent. In the same Pulse interview, Esther Arunga reveals that Quincy received an ultimatum to end their relationship and his political ambitions in exchange for his life. So you may be confused as to how Raila was able to vie for Langata MP while also vying for a presidential seat. So apparently that was possible before, but with the new constitution, that could no longer happen because Raila was now vying as a presidential candidate in the 2012-2013 elections. But had the new constitution not been promulgated, then he would have been able to vie for both. But I have a hard time believing Quincy was a threat because if you listen to that man speak, he cannot even formulate a proper sentence in English. He speaks gibberish. When he starts speaking, you can't even understand what he's trying to say. He cannot articulate himself properly. Yet, this was somehow the person who was supposed to be a political threat, someone who can't even express himself properly. He actually talks like a kid who's learning to speak. I have a challenge for you if you're listening to this. Go search for Quincy. Just any random interview. Go search for it and tell me whether that is someone who is able to lead anyone or lead a country or just have any position in leadership. Just based on how he speaks alone, I find that hard to believe. But again, this is just my opinion because you never really know. You never really know. But anyway, I still have a hard time believing that this man was a threat. But again, you never know. So I'm leaving room for that possibility with a lot of doubt. Even though the odds were against them, Quincy and Esther were determined to fight for their love. In a press conference at Helen's home in Runda, Esther announced that she was married to Quincy and that she had even changed her name.
Previously, you've known me as Esther Adongo Arunga. I have conducted a civil ceremony with Quincy Timberlake, and I am now married to Quincy Timberlake. From now henceforth, I will be known as Esther Adongo Timberlake. There's some formalities we're yet to complete, but I have the certificate of marriage, and we are now man and wife.
But according to Grace, Esther was not the only Mrs. Timberlake around.
I get another source who tells me, guys, you guys don't know who Quincy is. Quincy is married to someone else. This is where the wife lives with 3 sons. So again, we go to Obama Estate. At the time they were living in Obama Estate. I don't know if they still live there. The mom actually died. Yeah. So we go, we knock. She opens the door. She's like, yes, can I help you? I'm like, yeah, we are journalists. We've come to talk to you about Quincy. He's been hitting the headlines. She just said, I can't talk about that. And she closed the door on us. We didn't know her name. We just had her number. So we had to M-Pesa her 100 bob to get her name to write the story and say she's refused to comment.
The estranged wife, whose real name is Rose Mweni, would many years later share her side of the story and her experience as Quincy's wife. Unfortunately, Rose died in March 2022 after suffering from depression and other health complications. She left behind 3 sons, Trevor, Quincy, and Cassidy, all Mr. Timberlake's children. Around the same time this news broke, another lady came forward claiming that Quincy was a womanizer. The lady called into a Capital FM show and detailed her relationship with Mr. Timberlake.
Quincy has been hitting on women, me included, my friends, and I don't know when Esther and Quincy started going out, because just the other day I mailed Quincy and the mail he sent me was wow. It was.
Come on, tell us. I mean,
he really knows how to flirt.
Okay.
He wanted to find out who I stay with, where I stay, if I move out, so many things.
So he didn't really sound like a man of God then?
No. Okay, you see, that was just not long time ago. But
how long ago was this?
A month.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But long, because I understand he joined Finger of God.
Yes.
About a month, not so long ago.
Yeah.
But before that, I remember we used to talk like even 4 hours on the phone, non-stop.
With Quincy?
Yes.
Oh,
he used
my.
To call me.
For 4 hours, what are you telling each other?
But the way, let me tell you, Quincy is a very smart guy.
Yeah, very
the way
smooth.
He talks, he can talk like someone who is, you can't really tell. I mean, the Quincy people are getting to know now is not the Quincy I knew when we met. Yeah, because he talks like a smart guy. Like for me, when I got to know this, I was shocked for a minute, but then I started connecting things. I said, well, it really sounds like him. Like I remember one Sunday, he called. I think I found a missed call. It was late last year. I found a missed call, and I called him back. It was on a Sunday morning, around 10, 11. So he asked me. The first question wasn't even hi. It was, why haven't you gone to church? Because I told him, well, for me, I honestly, I've stayed for long without going to church. So for me, I thought there was that spiritual side of him. And even in the email, he used to quote Bible verses for me when I was down. Because that time I met him when I was in campus. You know, when he was hitting on me, I was really, I wouldn't lie to you, I thought he was a great guy. But through the emails, our email conversation, he will tell me one thing today, and then I will take like a month, and then ask him the same thing, he will give me a different answer. So that's when I started suspecting something.
Something was wrong.
I started, because for me to get to know someone, I have to really, really trust that person. News, in fact, much of this stuff I'm hearing today is not surprising to me about the Benny Hinn. That email, for me, the very first time I heard about Helen and Benny Hinn, I thought Benny Hinn must be Quincy. That one was not doubt for me. I knew that. I think I've heard you guys saying how Esther Arunga claimed that she's going out with him.
No, she has said it categorically. That is my boyfriend. And I'd like you, please watch it when you have time. Just go to our website because it's all there on capitalfm.co.ke, and you can watch the interview from start to finish.
Yeah, actually, that one, I'm concerned about that one because it was, I don't know how long they've been dating, because it was just end of January he was hitting on me again. So I don't know. So I don't think he's really. I'm really feeling sorry for Esther and for the wife if he has one, and the kids.
Even after news of Esther Arunga's co-wife broke, it seems she didn't mind sharing a man. Her main issue was with her parents and Dr. Njenga, the psychiatrist. On the same day she announced her marriage, she threatened to sue them for 300 million shillings.
I was later on released to a medical facility for psychiatric and medical tests. The day after I was released to him, he decided I was not mentally insane, but he still felt it was in his place to incarcerate me illegally and unlawfully, because under the Medical Act you don't incarcerate or detain somebody who's not mentally insane. He felt it was necessary for him to do that. Furthermore, he sedated me and gave me very heavy sedatives, which I'm still recovering from right now, via injection. At one time I had to be they trapped me. 5 people trapped me, and they forcefully gave me the medication and the sedative. And for that reason, after that I stayed there for 5 days under heavy sedation. And for that reason, I've been through a very difficult time and plan to sue Dr. He also did this in conjunction with my parents, who unfortunately I am forced to sue as well, and I will not be seeking less than 300 million shillings for unlawful detention, unlawful sedation, and a host of other criminal and civil charges that I'm going to be leveling against them.
Esther wasn't only going after her parents. She was also planning to sue the media, claiming defamation.
Secondly, I'd like to also say that I am going to go ahead and sue parts of the press, as some media houses, and joining some journalists, and also seeking some criminal charges against some journalists who printed things based on criminal evidence that was collected through criminal means. Makes you, if you use that evidence, it makes you an accomplice, an accessory to the fact, and therefore there are some journalists who I will be leveling criminal charges against. For the media houses, I will be seeking 30 million shillings at least. If the media houses are willing to apologize, I'm still open to accepting apologies. If there are media houses that are not willing to apologize but are willing to settle this matter, I'm still open. I'm not even acting anymore out of anger or disappointment or resentment. This is just the way the system works. You defame somebody, that person is likely to sue you.
She later withdrew the case under Quincy's advice.
I told Esther this is a bad guy. In fact, we had a meeting, my wife, myself, Quincy and Esther, 2010 December, in my house in Kitisuru, and I confronted Quincy with my evidence, including some of the motherboards he used to remove. After conning people on the internet, he would remove the motherboard so that the CIDs cannot access the information and all that. I confronted him with all that, including the syndicate he was running in Hurlingham. And the guy started shaking, he even cried. But then that's the day Esther turned against me. Esther said, oh, so you've joined my parents. From that time onward, she blocked me. She completely disconnected herself from me.
The audio you just heard is from a 2019 interview Helen did with NTV. At the time of this interview, Esther was about to be sentenced in a case involving the death of her son, Sinclair Timberlake, in 2014, which we'll talk about in part 3. Cracks had begun to form in Helen and Quincy's relationship. This eventually led to them falling out, and since Esther was now Quincy's wife, she also had to cut ties with Helen. Helen even quit the Placenta Party and kicked Quincy out of his church. But what was the reason for the fallout? Apart from Helen discovering that Quincy was an alleged cyber criminal, he also felt that Quincy made promises he couldn't keep. In a 2011 article published by The Star, Helen claimed that Quincy approached him with a Pepsi deal, claiming that they were interested in signing Helen as a brand ambassador. All Helen had to do was feature Quincy in his music videos. Quincy also told Helen that Irish-American film actor and producer Mel Gibson wanted to feature him in one of his movies. Quincy also claimed that Sarah Palin was to pay for Esther Arunga's maternity bills. Now, if you don't know who Sarah Palin is, she's a very controversial US politician, and you can go look her up to understand what I'm talking about better. Then there was also the promise of bringing Larry King to Kenya for an interview with Placenta Party. All of these promises were never fulfilled. Helen also claimed that Quincy was using witchcraft and that it was how he lured Esther into a relationship. Esther and Quincy also had their reasons as to why they cut Helen off. According to Esther, Helen cast a spell on her that caused her to be under his total control. She claimed that Helen turned her against her parents, forced her to sue them, and even demanded to be the one to name her son. Quincy even alleged that the Finger of God Church was a brothel and warned against attending the church. Whatever the case was, it was clear that the dynamic trio was done. With Esther and Quincy facing threats and fearing for their safety, they decided to leave the country. They sought asylum and fled to Dubai, then to Melbourne in Australia, where they settled with their child, Sinclair. But that would not be the last we'd hear from the Timberlakes, as things suddenly took a dark turn. With that being said, thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned for part 3, where we explore the Timberlakes' life in Australia, and let's get real and raw right here on the Raw Pod with me, Renee Were.